All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really provocative, sharply satirical piece of writing that takes a hard look at our modern relationship with privacy. Specifically, the text we're analyzing critiques this sudden, highly ironic wave of public outrage over government surveillance. The core focus here? It's exploring the sheer audacity of acting surprised that the government is watching its citizens, especially when, well, it's been doing exactly that the entire time in one way or another. Let's break down the author's arguments, understand this perspective on our digital footprints, and see exactly why this current panic is viewed as so completely absurd.
The text kicks things off with this smock-shocked quote, "Good heavens, they can see us?" to characterize what the author sees as a deeply naive reaction from the public. It directly addresses folks who are suddenly clutching their pearls over newly visible physical surveillance technology. By framing it this way, the piece immediately points out the hypocrisy of the whole situation. It suggests the public is acting like children, who've only just discovered they're being watched, completely ignoring the reality of the world we've literally been living in for decades.
So, this brings us to the core question the text is asking. Why are we suddenly so shocked by surveillance? The author expresses this genuine exasperation regarding the timing of this public revelation. Because, let's be honest, data collection is definitely not new. We're asked to really consider why this specific moment, this exact point in modern history, has triggered such widespread panic. If governments have been compiling data on citizens for a very long time, why is the public only now staggering into the streets to protest? Well, to understand the frustration, we need to look at the exact catalyst for this recent outcry.
Which brings us to Section 1, the flock camera outrage.
Consider the stark contrast we're looking at here, which is really the foundation of the author's critique. On one side, you have the relatively minor trigger of the current panic, flock cameras. These are basically just license plate reading cameras mounted on poles. The piece totally mocks the idea that a camera simply recording a 1987 Pontiac driving down the street is being treated as this massive violation of liberty. Then, look at the other side, what we've already willingly surrendered. We hand over our social security numbers, we leave digital traces every time we cross a border, and we send easily monitorable emails every single day. The author uses this comparison to impartially highlight the absurdity of the outrage. We essentially ignore the massive mountains of invisible data we volunteer daily, yet we absolutely panic over a visible camera on a pole.
Moving on to Section 2, the bureaucratic panopticon.
Let's actually define this concept because it perfectly describes the reality the author says we already live in. The bureaucratic panopticon is this massive, unseen system of records, transactions, and registrations. It's a structure that constantly tracks the perfectly legal, entirely mundane acts of modern existence. Now, a panopticon is traditionally a prison design where inmates can be watched at any time without actually knowing it. The argument being made here is that the government doesn't need to put a camera on every corner to watch you because the bureaucratic structures of modern society, they already do that job flawlessly. The audacity of acting surprised is exactly what fuels the frustration in this text, because we built this panopticon ourselves.
Just think about the everyday actions that, according to the text, have already volunteered us to this grand panopticon. Whether it's handing over your SSN to file a tax form, buying a cup of coffee, paying an electricity bill, or even just driving around and crossing a border. Using a smartphone or sending a basic email leaves a trace. The government knows, or at least can know, about all of it. The main point being driven home here is that you don't have to be a criminal or an espionage target to be watched. You just have to participate in modern civilization.
Next up, Section 3, a history of digital exhaust.
The text introduces this brilliant visual concept of digital exhaust. This refers to the accumulating electronic footprints of our movements, our purchases, our communications, and our financial transactions. And crucially, the author notes that this exhaust has been left behind for decades. Our data history is characterized as this enormous bureaucratic scrapbook. We've been quietly but consistently building the scrapbook for the government and corporations while simultaneously, and maybe a bit foolishly, pretending that privacy was something we still genuinely possessed. Tracing the evolution of this, the author argues that surveillance is absolutely not a new, startling invention of the modern era. I mean, generations ago, governments were already intercepting, cataloging, monitoring, and exploiting communications. Then we hit the digital transition. The machinery used for surveillance became digital, making it way more efficient and widespread. But the appetite for that information, that never changed. Which brings us to our current flock era. The source material finds it almost charmingly paranoid that people are suddenly discovering liberty just because a physical camera was mounted on a pole. The practice itself is old. It's literally just the technology that got an upgrade.
All of this leads to a very direct, highly exasperated challenge from the author. By what blind-ass logic is flock suddenly the moment when you draw the line? The text demands that readers justify their sudden sense of violated liberty. If governments have been cataloging our digital exhaust for generations, and if we willingly surrender our data daily to the bureaucratic panopticon, why on earth is a physical license plate reader the final straw? To the author, this reaction is just entirely illogical.
And finally, Section 4, when privacy actually died.
Here's where the piece pivots from mocking the outrage to explaining the stark reality of our situation. The central thesis of this entire critique is summarized like this. You have lived inside the surveillance state for decades. You just finally noticed the camera. This totally strips away the illusion that we were living in some pristine, private utopia right up until the flock cameras were installed. The government has been watching its citizens the entire time. The surveillance state isn't some brand new construction that just opened its doors. You've been a resident of it for a very, very long time. It's merely that its physical visibility, the actual camera on the pole, has finally caught the public's eye.
Now, importantly, the piece isn't saying we should just throw our hands up and give in. The critique is grounded by outlining actual constructive actions for pushing back. If you want to object to excessive surveillance, the author offers legitimate steps. Step 1, demand warrants. Step 2, demand limitations on exactly how data is used. And Step 3, demand transparency from the agencies collecting that data. These are logical, systemic ways to handle the reality of the bureaucratic panopticon. What is firmly rejected by the author, however, is the manufactured, hypocritical outrage of staggering into the street screaming about a camera as though privacy was just murdered yesterday.
We're going to close with this incredibly powerful final thought from the source text. Privacy didn't die last Tuesday. You merely received the obituary today. It just perfectly encapsulates this entire explainer. The audacity of the public surprise is fundamentally misplaced because the loss of absolute privacy is a historical fact, not a breaking news story. So as you go about your day-to-day, generating your own digital exhaust, paying your bills, using your smartphone, I want you to ask yourself, how much of your bureaucratic scrapbook did you write today? And were you even aware you were writing it? Thanks so much for joining me to unpack this fascinating text.